So, yeah, welcome to my talk, Building Modern React Applications. So before I begin, I want to introduce myself. So my name is Glenn Reyes, as Jordan already mentioned. I'm an independent software engineer based in Vienna, Austria. So I work for myself, and what I mainly do is I help companies and people create great products by using GraphQL and React day to day. And besides that, I help the React Vienna meetups. I help to run with other people in Vienna to run the React Vienna meetups. So in case you get there, I'd be happy to talk to you, and I'd love to meet you there. And also, I'm Glenn Reyes on Twitter, but you just skip the E's. So yeah, that's my weird Twitter handle. Now, let's kick off this talk with the question, why do we love building applications? But especially, why do we love building modern applications? So the term modern, so it's kind of like it implies something that's new, that's more updated or fresh. And when we create something new, it brings us kind of like joy and happiness to our life, right? So especially when it's new, everybody loves new things, and even better when we get new things. For example, if we go shopping and buy new clothes or buy our new bag. And it's similar to code. When we go to GitHub, we are like shopping for the new like third-party lib that is just came out, and we love this kind of exploration there, right? And especially in web development, new things are coming out every day, and this is actually for a reason. And when we build applications using new tools that we've never used before, they intrinsically lets us step out of our comfort zone, and basically we learn from them, right? So building modern apps lets us keep moving forward, because there we are surrounded with all the new tools. And also modern apps lets us build great things. Here's a great quote from the Dutch post-impressionist painter Vincent van Gogh, who's saying, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. So it's rarely that you bring something great at once, like in a bigger event. It's more like that you build something great from smaller things, right? Now, let's take a quick step back and ask what modern actually means. So here's a great definition from David Alfred, who says, in its simplest form, the term modern implies the up-to-date, a current development, or a spirit in a step with its own time. So the last one is quite interesting, like spirit in step with its own time. So basically, what that means is it's kind of like a time frame that is moving with us, right? So moving with the present. And in tech, that's probably known for like the bleeding edge, so or cutting edge, and all the exciting stuff that we want to use, but yeah, we actually shouldn't, right? And the bleeding edge in the web is a little bit interesting, because we see there new libraries like released every day, and anything that came out yesterday is generally outdated today. We could call them legacy code already, right? So it's stuff that is like that is a little bit less exciting, right? Now, actually, in this talk, I want to focus on building modern React apps. How many of you have experience with building modern React apps? So hands up. Okay, this is almost everybody, I guess. How many of you has React hooks shipped in production? Oh, that's a little bit less. Okay, other question. How many of you have concurrent mode shipped in production? Okay, that's badass. React solves many problems that we've faced in app development. So the Facebook React team has been so busy shipping new features along with the new Facebook app. So this is the new Facebook app that you don't see yet, but you will see it soon. And when you see it, this will have like lots of the greatest and the best features that you will have in React. And it's no wonder that React is constantly growing, so, and it's getting even better. So there is it's just getting higher. You don't see anything on it. So here are interesting results from of the developer satisfaction from the State of JS 2018 survey. So here's a comparison of React with other popular front-end frameworks. So the red bar are for the users that used it and would use it again. In contrast to the other ones is who have never heard it or which wouldn't use it. So in the React case, which is here on the left, you see it's at almost 65%, so it's almost a third who have used it and would use it again, which is amazing. Now, let's talk a little bit about different story. What are the best ways, basically, when we want to start building a modern React app? Well, thinking about it is quite okay, but actually there are tons of great starters and boilerplates that solves most of the use cases and helps us to get just jump-started. When I was starting React back in the day, which was I think back in 2015, like late 2015, there wasn't any starter or any good starter that I had to or that I could just use just for starting React. So I had to build like everything with Webpack first. Like I had to build these configurations first before I could even start it with React. And there wasn't even like things like unpackage or something where you could just put it into your HTML file and start writing React. So basically, now all this great tool exists. So what I want to say here is we shouldn't waste our time configuring Webpack now or any testing on dev environment. So if you want to build React, you should go ahead and start doing it and try to save try to reduce time to configure it and stuff like that. So when you get started building React apps, I think most people face into these three frameworks to start with. So one is Create React App, which is client-side, which is very simple to start with. It has the best practices, and it probably has also the greatest community support compared to the others. So the other one is Next.js. So this is more like for complex apps, which comes server-side rendered out of the box and with features like dynamic routing. And the other one is Gatsby. So for the ones that are building like more static pages, this is the perfect framework to start with, and it has also like PWA setup out of the box and a great plugin ecosystem. But other than that, others are fine too, so it doesn't mean that you have to choose between these three. So use what works best for you and your team and what solves most of your use cases. Now, what are the benefits of building apps with a modern stack? And why building apps with a modern stack, actually? It is amazing to use and contribute back that comes from the open source community. And popular libraries are being actively maintained. So this means if you're stuck, it's likely that your bug has been fixed elsewhere and you get questions are answered really, really quickly. And you have all these different platforms, for example, like Stack Overflow that people talk about, or Spectrum when you have like certain it depends on the library how big it is, but you get the point. And working with a modern stack is like really, really powerful. And actually what makes people feel so powerful is people love fixing bugs in other people's code. So you don't always have problems in your own code, right? You got to find your problems in other people's code. So that's why people love solving problems. And if you think about it, if there are no problems, what are we trying to solve them? Otherwise, there is no reason why we would do web dev, right? So no problems, no nothing, not getting paid. Now, how are problems solved in React today? So let's talk first state management. I think we had a lot of talks today and yesterday about state management. So state management is basically like a problem on its own. So that's why I see solutions like this that has been evolved over the past that try to solve that. So one is like Redux, and then the other one is MobX, which is kind of like Redux, but with a little bit less boilerplate. And then the other one is Apollo, which is basically for GraphQL. and especially MobX. MobX deserves actually much love from the community, as it's so underrated. So Cancer just recently tweeted about it, who's saying that who's believing that people are actually better off with MobX than Redux, and it's actually kind of crazy that probably 90% of here is using Redux but not MobX, and yeah, it's kind of like crazy to that it is like this. And actually, me myself, I've never tried MobX myself, so it's kind of yeah, weird. And yeah, actually just last year, the React team has shipped and improved its own state management library with the new context API. And actually the context API is not really new, but the new API kind of makes it new. So you don't really need to depend on third libraries anymore, right? So you just use that for state management. So basically, React itself is your state management library, right? And this is a quick look how it looks like, right? So what we do here is we wrap our content with our context provider, and then somewhere, like for example here, a themed button. We use it there so the other components are not being re-rendered when we, for example, update the state. So context is basically a nice replacement of all the other ones that comes out of the box from React. And cool thing about that is that context doesn't have to be globally accessible. So what does that mean? For example, imagine you have this Twitter home feed, right? So where you have a composer at the top and like a feed in your main content. And in JSX, probably the whole thing would be inside your app component. And if you create a context that has information about the feed, what you want to do is you want to wrap it as close as possible. So you put the feed context just around your feed, right? So what you notice also here is that you basically skip the tweet composer at the top. So you only have it really on the feed. And in contrast, for user data, for example, we only need it in the composer for our avatar. Or even better, we could actually put it just only to the avatar because the input field doesn't really need it. So maybe it might be a better case to just do it like that, right? So summing up, put context state as close as needed. Now, let's talk about what's new in React. So first, hooks. Hooks was actually really big. So this hooks is a release that has been released earlier this year and brought a big movement, actually. So hooks are a new addition to React 16.8. And basically what they do is they lets us use state and other big React features without writing a class. So yeah, there's function components. So that's pretty interesting. Previously, we heard stateless components, which is kind of like not common anymore. So we call them only function components as they may contain state now, right? And same with stateful components, as they are now just simply class components. So yeah, basically, use hooks for new components if the team is fine with it. So try it out, see if it helps. And don't rewrite your entire app, and keep existing class components as they are, and rewrite them only if it makes sense. So the recommendation here is just don't rewrite your entire app. Just don't now refactor because there's hooks your entire app, because the class components won't go anywhere. They will still stick here, and they will still be as they are. It's just another way to build components that has state or other React features in it. So the other big thing that has been announced not a long time ago are the experimental concurrent mode. So concurrent mode is coming soon, and this is, in my opinion, something that will have a dramatic performance impact to the user experience. So what is concurrent mode? Concurrent mode is a set of new features that help React apps stay responsive and gracefully adjust to the user's device's capabilities and network speed. And one of the mechanisms to achieve this is Suspense. So what is Suspense? So Suspense lets components wait for something before rendering. As of today, in the stable release, it only supports loading components dynamically with the lazy API, aka code splitting. So in the current experimental release, we see now ways to use Suspense for data fetching and concurrent rendering. So the general idea is to allow the components to suspend their render. For example, if they need extra data loaded from external sources, so once all the information is there, React will try to re-render the component, right? So here's a quick example of how to use Suspense with code splitting. So basically, you have the Suspense wrapper, which you pass, where you pass the fallback prop to the, where you pass an element as a fallback prop, and while the heavy component is being loaded, you might eventually see the fallback element in a certain holistic threshold, right? And there are tons of other features like fragments, like memo and portal and the profile API for measuring performance that we could talk to each of these in a separate talk. So I just leave it like this for now. Now let's take a quick view into some common patterns that we've seen over time. So high order components. What are high order components? Basically, it's a function that takes a component and returns a new component, which allows you to give like new props, injects new props into the current component, right? The other one is render props. It allows you to access to these props in a scoped way. And hooks is just the same thing that I've introduced before. And how do we fetch data in React? So there are basically three approaches how to do that now. So one is fetch on render. So you might be familiar with how to do that for with the class component. So what we do here is we start to fetch after the component has been rendered in the component did mount lifecycle. So and for function components, we would do that now with hooks is with a use effect hook, where we put the fetch data inside, and once we get the data, we set state, and once we if we get an error, we set the error. So here's an example how it looks like. So you see here the timeline on the left and the UI here on the right. So first you download the code, and once the code is downloaded, we then start to render a loading state and fetch the user data. And once we have fetched the data, we render the user data and load and the loading UI for the feed and start fetching for the feed data. And once we have the data, we render the data to the UI. So you notice the waterfall here, which can lead to huge loading times at more complex use cases, right? So the second approach tries to solve the waterfall in some way, so which is called fetch, but then render. So the way how it works is to intrinsically start fetching multiple data sources at once. So instead of fetching one data source, we utilize the promise.all API. And how this works is after we have fetched everything, we can then set this data at once. So here's how it looks like at the timeline again. So we download the code. We show a loading indicator. We start fetch the user data and the feed data. And then some time passes. Then the user data is done. So we have downloaded the user data, but we still see just the loading indicators, and the fetch, like the feed data is still loading. And after a while again, we are now able to render the actual user and feed data. So this sort of solves the waterfall, but introduces another problem actually. So you saw the user data was fetched, but it was not rendered yet. And I know this can be fixed in code somewhere, But in certain use cases, this can be very, very complex, so as it's not very idiomatic enough. So the third approach to solve this one is the render as you fetch, which leverages Suspense that tries to solve this problem. So here, what we do is we start fetching first, and then start rendering, right? So we download the code, we then start fetching, and then start rendering actually, but we don't actually see anything yet. So the best case scenario would be like it renders your UI right away without even showing any loading indicator, right? So let's take another scenario. So we download the code, and then we start again fetching, and then after that we render. And then some time passes, and then suddenly we hit one threshold. So we start like rendering a loading indicator in the composer. And then after some time passes, we start another loading indicator, but in the feed data, right? And then after that, we start rendering the feed data because this is the first one that has been loaded. So we are able now to see the UI for that. And eventually, you receive all the data and render it to your UI. So again, this approach will dramatically change and directly impact the user experience performance-wise. This is all great, but it's good to mention that Suspense for data fetching is not available yet. You can try it out. There is an experimental version for that. And if you want to, you can check out this docs how to enable that. So let's talk about systems. And in this particular case, I want to talk about, for example, type systems, right? So why would I need a type system? By writing types, it provides us type safety, robustness, and confidence and awareness. So for example, also auto suggestions, which lets us like give some suggestions, and it lets us actually think less about what actually is available here, right? And other one is no more runtime types, which actually reduces also our bundle size. So no more prop types. So here's what it looks like in the editor. So when we have types where we just put in the component and have no idea what it is, but once we start typing, we see what actually is there. So it actually just suggests us already what is available and what not. And there are basically in the React community 2 major type systems that are well adopted. So one is TypeScript, which is coming from Microsoft, and the other one is Flow, which is created by Facebook. So I guess TypeScript is a little bit more common in the open source community. So yeah, design systems. So design systems are quite fundamental when it comes to consistency in UIs and components. And it's important not only for consistency, but also saves us time and work for like recreating new UIs over and over again. And for that, there are style guides which helps us to document common UI components that are used across the company. And even better, like living style guides that are great for both working and on a single component, and also trying them out to display them in all kinds of different variants and states and like that, right? When you build a design system, you want to make sure that we have sizing scales for example, for fonts, for spaces, and media breakpoints. We want to add like theming constraints to contribute to a consistent UI. Now, what does it mean? So here's a quick look on how theming with, for example, style system, which is one way to do that, look like for style components. So you can see here on the left, like a big object, like a list of, for example, breakpoints, where you have only like these breakpoints that you're able to use. Or, for example, the space, you have only these kinds of spaces that you use in the scale. or fonts. So for the body, for the heading. So you basically have not much variety to lose. So and to use that is on the right. For example, variant, which applies the variant then in our design system, and instead of like putting pixels into the margins or into any spacings, for example here, instead of like manually putting the margin of a margin of 8 pixels, we put in the index of our margin and our spacing scale with the MR prop that we see here. Now, how do we architect modern React applications using a type system and design system? So it really depends. We actually gotta make sure that, or we gotta make actually many different decisions and micro decisions when it comes to adding both type and design systems. For example, how much value will XYZ bring? Like, it depends really if you have multiple apps or have a single blog page, what to use and what not. So probably if you have something smaller, you won't probably need like a type system even. And how much time will we potentially save on future projects? So how much time will we save by adding that? And it's really tough question to answer globally, but it really depends on your current use case. But what I can recommend here is it's always the best way to always start simple. So always start, maybe try using React. Don't go and install the 10 Redux dependencies before you haven't written anything else or haven't coded anything else. So find out and measure maybe how third-party state management libraries like Redux will improve your workflow by adding it maybe afterwards. So also watch the hype. So new or modern doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best. Try to find out how new patterns will improve your workflow and find out what the drawbacks are. So you don't have to use it because it's new. So think from inside. What makes you more productive and what is more enjoyable to work with. Also keep good practices that works in the past. For example, higher order components or render props, they still have valid use cases. I hear many people like they are saying that you don't need render props anymore since hooks. But actually render props are still 100% fine, so it's great that we have that, right? So, and also, yeah, new things, don't let them intimidate you. So use what works best for you, for your team, and keep the class components as they are because they won't go anywhere. And it will be fine. And also, write the best code possible. So, because once they become legacy, and if you look back at your code, and if they're still great, we'll enjoy them even more, right? And yeah, do what keeps you more productive. So use what works best for you and your team. Do what keeps you working fast and efficient. Most importantly, never stop learning. And especially never stop learning new things. So I'd like to share also these links that I've used as resources to keep really updated with the latest and greatest updates of React. So I'd encourage you to check them out if you're interested about what's next. And that's all I got. Thank you very much.